Thank you, Kate. Apologies. Over to you.
No, that's all right. Yeah, so just say so. I'm adult social care programme manager at South Gloss Council, and sort of coordinate on behalf of the 3 local authorities the Proud to Care campaign. And what I would like to do today is just to take you through the current winter campaign that we're running, just to give you some information about it, and give you a bit of an update in terms of how it's performing, and would welcome a conversation with you around how we can ensure that we're getting the best results for you from the campaign, and sort of in terms of next steps, are there sort of things that you would welcome in terms of us taking forward. So a bit of information, and then a conversation with you would be really fantastic. I'm sure you're all aware of the Proud to campaign. It's been running for a number of years, and it's across the southwest, and we have a campaign that we run across Bristol, North Somerset and South Gloss collectively, sort of to fit our sort of ICS footprint, but also supported via each of the 3 local authorities. And the objective of the campaign is to promote careers in care and to provide a sort of an opportunity to match people responding to aspects of the campaign to available roles in care. So this particular campaign push, the winter campaign, has been sort of supported and sponsored by the CCG. So I think sort of there has been increasing recognition both of the criticality of having a resilient social care sector across the system, through the pandemic, and a recognition that workforce is a key part of that. So this is the first time that we've had investment from the CCG in supporting this activity, which I think is really positive. And there's a lot of interest in terms of feedback we get from this campaign. So hence the conversation with yourselves would be really helpful about where to take that in the future. So if we could move on one, Karen, that would be really helpful. So this particular campaign, what we've tried to do is to sort of refresh the look and feel of what we're doing, very much going for a positive and sort of celebratory feel, sort of really going on the sort of promotion of social care and the valuing of social care, the angle of that. Again, we've typically sort of focused activity towards 3 key target audiences, being people that are new, who haven't worked in social care previously. That's who it's aimed at, and specifically at younger people, work returners, and the older workforce. So with this new look and feel, which is under the banner Be Proud to Care, so do sort of follow up and have a look on the link if you haven't done so already, just to sort of familiarise yourself with how that's doing. So we were ran a sort of we're able to do a what we decided was it would be really helpful and really most impactful to have profiles of local people that are working in care in our system and tell their stories in a really positive way. So we had 38 care workers come forward, which was across 11 providers across Bristol, North Somerset and South Gloss, representing a number of different sectors. And we have produced a number of profiles for each of those individuals, and it's those profiles that we will use and have been using throughout the campaign to put across the various different key messages that we want to put across about, so why care is attractive to young people, work returners and older people. And so the methodology is a very standard recruitment campaign. So it's the social media, it's paid advertising across Facebook and Twitter and Google, and it's also then supported by the local authority's own social media. So that's going out in the residents' bulletins, it's going out in the gazettes, so it gives us quite a big reach, and again taking different themes that we're trying to appeal to the various different audiences. So we launched on December the 10th, and it's still in development, phase 1, so we're still working up, and there's some aspects that we want to add to the campaign as we move forward. There's some animations in development which we can use on various social media outlets, which are, you know, sort of, we know that people respond to really positively, so we want to develop those, and there's some further sort of events and advertorials that also sort of fit behind the campaign. So if you haven't had the opportunity to do so, do sort of go and have a look. And what that does, if people respond to the campaign, they then click on those locality sites, the locality buttons that takes people through to the Proud to Care campaign pages for the local authority and the jobs pages, so the jobs that are advertised on those sites. Could you move on, please, for me, Karen? So, okay, this is just a little bit of information about the impact so far. So we, as I say, we launched on the 10th of December, and there have been 2,500, this is sort of last week's data, but 2,500 clicks to the main landing page, which is more favourable than the level of response that we got this time last year. So I think the refreshed approach does seem to be appealing to people, and of those contacts that landed on the landing page, of those, just over, 500 clicked on the apply for jobs. So that means that people went through, create an action to actually click on a live job ad. And what, with the advertising that we're doing, our average reach for the advertising is around 64,000. So I think, and these are going out weekly. So I think what we're probably seeing is that we're getting quite a good reach and quite a good response, and that sort of is being reinforced in the other things that we're doing, so which I've listed underneath. But obviously, all of this, is great. But what we want to see is actually that this is translating into increased applicants for you, that you're seeing sort of people that perhaps haven't worked in care before putting in applications, and they are a good fit for you, because obviously that's the object of the exercise, as well as putting a really positive promotional aspect of roles in care out there. So if you could move on for me, please, Karen, that'd be brilliant. So I think, firstly, I just want to say thank you very much. We've had some fantastic support from you in terms of being engaged with the campaign, putting people forward, being involved in sort of some of the launch advertising and promotion. So thank you very, very much for that. And we're always very open for anyone else that would like to take part, that would like to be involved as well, because obviously we will be moving forward with new aspects of the campaign. So please let me know, and let the Proud to Care leads know if you're interested in taking part, and the emails are on the bottom there. We are sort of obviously really keen to understand whether this is making a difference, whether you're seeing a difference on the ground in terms of the number of applications that are coming through to you, and it's very, very difficult to track that in any way. So I'll sort of take the slides down in a minute, and then perhaps we can have a conversation about sort of what's the best way of trying to understand the impact, and how we can get a better sense of what difference this is making. And I think also recognizing that the recruitment and promotion is only one aspect of building a resilient and sustainable workforce, and whilst that is the specific sort of rationale for Proud to Care, it would be useful to get a sense from you about what else would help and what else would make a difference. There was also a sort of a plea if you are in the lucky position of having a number of appointable candidates, more than you can fill, then if anyone could be redirected back to Proud to Care, and we can perhaps match them with another local provider and with opportunities, that would be brilliant. So if we could perhaps stop sharing the slides, that would be great. And it is a large number of people, so I wonder if perhaps using the chat might be the best way of having the conversation. So I guess the two questions I'd sort of like to pose is, one is, what difference are you seeing, if any, to the levels of applications that are coming through, and if anything you can see as being attributable to Proud to Care, and what would be the best way of trying to assess impact from your point of view?
Anybody would like to put anything in the chat, we can read it out. There are some people with their screen, they're not muted, and I think Rita, Belinda, could you mute yourselves, please? Right, there is a question. What would be the best way to access impact? And what difference are you seeing in the numbers of applications you are seeing? That's two questions, Kate. Kath. Yeah, Kate, sorry. That was from Kath. So what difference are you seeing in the number of applications? And what would be the best way to access impact?
So perhaps while you're mulling about that, there is a sort of a second phase that's already in plan, and within that phase, there's a piece of work, a piece of market research insights work that has been commissioned again through the CCG, which is looking at barriers and opportunities, and again focused on people who have not previously worked in care, and the outputs from that are twofold really, and would very much like to share them with Care and Support West as well. One is to look at the geographic sort of point of view, are there things that are so perhaps things that we need to be talking with commissioning colleagues about, that there are structural changes that we need to do that would support and increase the attraction of new people into care, and also sort of what we need to be doing in terms of sort of the recruitment and attraction side of things, or perhaps the employee offer type of things, again, that would then lead to having conversations with local authority commissioners and yourselves. So the results of that sort of market research is expected at the end of March, and would be very happy to bring it back here and share that with you to see if that gives us any more insight in how we can develop it. And there is, in our second phase, we're also looking to create some videos, video content that can be used in career events, that could be used by yourselves as well in career events, if that would be helpful, focused on things like career progression and flexibility of working, trying to again focus against those three particular work groups, so target groups, I mean. So, and if there is any providers who are interested in taking part in those and getting involved in those, we'd be delighted to have you on board. So just please let me know.
Thank you. There are a couple of questions, Kate. I'm not sure if you can read them. Do you want me to read them to you? Can you see them on?
Yeah, I can see that. So I don't know. So Kirsty, not sure about the number of applications, but West would be to ask applicants. Yes, yeah, and I think probably some people I think that do that at the moment, don't they? So I think it would be helpful for us because sort of these are this is investment being made, and we want to make sure that it's actually delivering for you. So yes, I think any sort of insights that we can get from you, that would be really, really helpful. So Richard, good development of Proud to Care initiative, and so Richard already asked at the interview. So we need to record those data about whether people are having come through Proud to Care, and Becky as yet hasn't had anyone through Proud to Care. So I think it's
right.
So I think if people are able to ask, and then sort of perhaps we've can think about how we can feed that in, or if I come back another time, we can have a further conversation about it. That might be
Okay.
the less painful way of doing it, because obviously we don't want to give you another administrative burden
No.
on this.
All right. That's lovely, Kate. Time's pressing on, so if there's no more questions, thank you very much. Appreciate you coming here today. Whether you hang around and listen to the rest of is entirely up to you. You're more than welcome to.
That's very kind. Thanks, Karen. I think I'll dip out at this point. Obviously, I've left the contact details on the slides, so if anyone has any further questions, please come back to me. That would be great.
Yeah, the slides will
Thank
be
you.
shared. Thank you very much, Kate.
Thank you very much. Take care, everybody. Bye.
Right. So, without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to our next speaker, Damien Caddy. Damien had me worried yesterday. I couldn't get hold of him, and I was thinking, oh my goodness me. But thankfully he's here today. So Damien, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you ever so much, Karen. Welcome everyone. I'm Damien Caddy, and I'm the Mental Capacity Act and DoLS manager for North Somerset Council, and I also have a role within the clinical commissioning group as well. I'm just going to try to get my host participant has disabled screen sharing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's try it now.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay. There you go. It's my turn to panic there, Karen. Okay. All right. Lovely. Bear with me, everyone, and I'll just get this going, and then we can. No, don't want that now. Fantastic. Karen, can you see that? Is that up on the screen?
Yes, perfect.
Fantastic. Okay. So I thought what I would do for the session today is to look at capacity assessment in depth a little bit more. Why? Well, two reasons. One is I suspect you're all sick of hearing about LPS, and it still hasn't come into effect and has been delayed further. So rather than give you lots more information about a scheme that seems to be forever kicked down the road, I thought let's focus on something important and something that's the kind of bedrock of the Capacity Act, and that is capacity assessment. Often sort of given a bit of short shrift, I think, which is ironic, really, considering the fact that it's a Mental Capacity Act. We tend to focus on best interests rather than capacity. And one of the areas that I thought causes a lot of confusion is around what information does a person need to understand to make a decision. So that's what we're going to try and look at today. So starting with some the kind of the basics, really, it's worth remembering that capacity is a two-stage test. Okay, so a person is deemed to lack capacity if they have an impairment or disturbance of the mind or brain. So that generally is something like a dementia or a learning disability, or it can be something temporary like a delirium as well. And then the second stage is that impairment or disturbance means that they're unable to make a specific decision at the time it needs to be made. So if we're going to throw some big fancy words at this, we can see that the first stage is what we call the diagnostic test, and the second is the functional test. Okay, so we're actually going to look at it the wrong way round, if you like. We're going to look at the functional test now before we look at the diagnostic test, and I'll explain the reasons for that in a minute. So, you know, as I said, throwing some posh words around, but actually you'll all know what the functional test of capacity is, and you'll more than likely recognize these things that the person needs to do. So they need to understand information about the decision that needs to be made, and they need to understand the relevant information. So if we go back to the actual legislation itself, the statute, that's the wording that is referred to. And that's what we're going to dig down into in this session. They need to retain that information in their mind, use or weigh, not use and weigh. So that is important, and communicate their decision, through talking, but it could be through other means as well, such as sign language or writing. So you might kind of say, well, all right, that sounds fairly simple and fairly straightforward, but I'm not sure that it always is. And that's one of the reasons why I think we have so many difficulties sometimes doing capacity assessments, and that people sort of wince or shy away from completing them, because it is actually, I would argue, perhaps, I think that perhaps undersells what's involved in capacity assessment. It makes it look a little bit simpler than it is. So the questions that we still need to ask in that is, well, what is the decision that they have to make? Now, hopefully, I mean, the Mental Capacity Act's been out now since 2005. Hopefully, one of the key things that people have realized by now is that it's decision specific. So if you find yourself kind of saying, well, the person clearly lacks capacity, then just, or somebody else says that, just challenge yourself or challenge the other person and say, well, in regard to what? Is it where they live? Is it contact with another person? Is it their finances? And that's the first thing that you have to establish when you're going to make an assessment of capacity. Another question, and the one that's particularly, as I said, we want to sort of look into today, is what is the relevant information for that decision? And of course, that information that somebody needs to understand is going to be different for each person and for each decision. So there's a lot of room for interpretation in that. It's not the sort of very objective scientific test it might appear to be when we first look at it. There's actually quite a lot of room for interpretation and different interpretations. So I brought here three different areas of decision making that you as care home managers might be asked to comment on, and certainly within my team, it's an area that we look at. So the first is if the person is able to manage their finances, if the person is able to choose where they live for their care and support. And I've thrown a bit of a curveball in, which is if the person can consent to sexual intimate relationships. Now, you might think in terms of the latter one, well, what's that got to do with us? Well, I'm sure in some of your homes, people do form relationships, and sometimes they perhaps go beyond simply hand-holding and go into other areas. So often that causes a huge amount of anxiety, and people might say, well, what on earth do we do? What are our responsibilities here? So in some of these areas, the courts have given us some guidance or a structure to use when we're assessing capacity. They haven't in regard to finances. So if you're assessing capacity in relation to finances or property and affairs, then it's kind of up to you, really. It's up to you or whoever's assessing capacity to decide what the relevant information is. Not hugely helpful, and I hope, I think with most of these areas of decision making, the court protection are gradually getting around to sort of giving some guidance. But what we do have is that, something like where the person is, lives for their care and support, there is very specific guidance. And if the person can consent to sexual or intimate relationships, there is specific guidance there as well. So what I would like to do very quickly, and bear with me, so I will try and get a example form up here. So actually, sorry, yes, can everyone, Karen, can you give me a thumbs up if you can see that?
Yeah, I can see that,
screen?
that's fine, absolutely fine.
Fantastic. Okay, so what I've done here is it's done a sort of mock-up form of what a capacity assessment, and this is a kind of good practice covering all the bases example. So I don't want people to look at this and be, intimidated by it or think, well, we couldn't do that. This is what you would do if you were covering off all aspects of the case law. This is an example of a lady in a care home. It's a North Somerset pro forma that we're using here. So, it may be different to the ones that are used in your areas, but broadly they'll be the same. So
Damien, I've just had somebody saying they can't see the form.
okay.
I can see it. Is anybody else struggling to see the form? Can somebody put something in the chat if you can, or David, can you see the form?
Yeah, I think what I can see is a sheet with forms, capacity, residence / care. I think that's the form you're
Right.
talking about.
Yeah, okay, no, it's the wrong form. So bear with me for a second. Let me stop the share.
Okay.
And I will share my screen again. Right, yes, okay, I see what I've done. Okay, there we go. You'll have to excuse me. I'm used to working with Teams, so Zoom is a little alien to me. So hopefully now you should see a form that says North Somerset Capacity Assessment.
Yes, we can.
Tunnock.
Perfect.
Great, okay. So I'm going to take you through these quickly. A kind of asks you, well, why is a capacity assessment being completed? So, basically you want to say, well, why are we even questioning capacity in the first place? And I think it's worth saying that the very nature of assessing capacity can sometimes be intrusive, and we might feel that if it was applied to ourselves. If someone was going to do a capacity assessment on us, our initial reaction might be, well, what business is it of yours? So this is a spot to kind of say, look, here are the problems, and this is why we're assessing capacity. This is a risk, and these are the concerns. B relates very specifically to what the specific decision is. And I know that might seem like something that's kind of straightforward and self-evident, but if we don't set at the beginning what the decision is, then all the rest of the assessment following on from here is going to be a mess. So we need to be really specific. What is the decision? Now, in this case, we've talked about whether Martha has capacity in regard to where she resides for her care and support. Now, the reason I've put this mock assessment up is because this is the assessment of capacity as care home managers you're going to be most involved with doing. This is a capacity assessment that informs the DoLS application. Can the person decide to stay in our or my care home? When we come to C, we look here and we've got a prompt to tell you, well, what is that mental impairment? And it's important to say it doesn't have to be diagnosed. It's enough that it's suspected, but you need to be really clear as to what that is. And in this case, we've said that the lady doesn't have a diagnosed impairment, but it's a suspected dementia. Now, here we come to the issue of the relevant information. Now, if you have a particular guidance that you're using, then you can put this here. And what I would say is, don't worry, we're not certainly wouldn't be expecting you to be quoting case law. But one of the things that I am going to send to Karen for distribution is a really useful document from 39 Essex Chambers, which basically takes different decisions. So the different decisions that we spoke about earlier, and gives you exactly what the person would need to understand in order to make that decision. So in the case of where somebody resides for their care and support, it's very specific. It is this piece of case law here. I'll also send this mock-up assessment to you, so you could kind of use this as a template for further assessments that you do when you're doing your capacity assessments, simply cutting out the bits from the template and keeping the case law in there. Section E is really important, and it's the area of the Mental Capacity Act that often gets forgotten, and that's principle 2, that you must support the person to make the decision. It's not enough that we simply get our stopwatch and say, right, you have 30 seconds to tell me all you can about where you live and the risks that you would be subject to if you go home. Go. It's not a test. It's a two-way conversation when you're sharing your concerns, sharing the person's care needs, sharing the options, and then trying to determine what their understanding is, whether they're using the information that you're giving them. So here, is really where you determine how you've done that. So in this case, I've said, well, you know, Martha's hard of hearing. We've said, you know, we've made sure she's had her hearing aids in place. She's generally most alert after lunch. So we've done the assessment there. Also detailed that, you know, you prompted her with the relevant information as you've gone through. So often forgotten, but absolutely essential to the process of assessing capacity. The next section is the kind of heart of the assessment, if you like. And this relates back to those functional elements that I talked about. So does the person understand? Can they retain? Can they use or weigh? And can they communicate the information? Now, what I've tried to do here is to use the case law. And unfortunately, I don't know why, but it's come up in this awful black and white, but the bits of case law, the bits that judges say that we should include are sort of written in bolder type here. And I'll just, as I'm talking, I would just ask that you just have a bit of a read through this, or have a read through it afterwards, to get an idea as to kind of like the level of understanding that a person would need to have to be able to have capacity. One of the difficulties, or one of the natural impulses sometimes with capacity assessment, is that if it's down to you to sort of set what the person needs to understand, that if you're concerned about them or concerned about decisions that you're making, there's a sort of natural protective tendency to kind of up the threshold, if you like, and sort of ask the person to demand perhaps more than they need to then bring them in under the threshold of having capacity, and then allow us to make decisions on their behalf. And one of the main sort of things that comes out of case law is to warn us very much about that. So I'm not going to take every point here because we do have limited time, but you know, some important things to perhaps note are, if we start from the beginning, we've got the 2 or more options for living. So be really clear when you're talking to the person, well, what are the actual concrete options? Are they staying at a care home or moving back to their own property? Is their property still even there, or is it being sold? Or is it, you know, as can often happen, is that the person's property has been sold? So the only option in that moment is to stay where they are, or homelessness. So be really clear up front. So it does mean that you do have to do a little bit of thinking about it. Some of the items are fairly straightforward. So you can see here, they need to understand the difference between living somewhere and just visiting it. And then I've given a little sort of verbatim account of what she said. So Martha said, living somewhere is somewhere where you have a GP, and visiting somewhere is just temporary. So in that case, it's clear that she understood the relevant information. The other thing I'd say when you're looking at this is that it is not definite in terms of it. It's a guidance and it's framework. So if there are any bits that don't apply, it's okay to leave those out. So for instance, you'll see here that the payment of rent or bills is an area that somebody needs to understand. So if they're, you know, living in your care home, for instance, then, you know, that may be funded, or they may have to pay towards it. If they're going home, they may have to, you know, pay towards the cost of a mortgage or rent. In this case, I've said, well, actually, it isn't relevant because she owns her own property. So the payment of rent and bills, or rent anyway, was not relevant. I have, however, said that actually, you know, she is aware that if her power of attorney doesn't pay her bills, then she would be cut off when talking about her utilities. So, as I said, have a look through this after the session today. Please feel free to use it as a template. So you can leave all the bold areas in and then simply cut out the bits where you've got, you know, Martha's responses. Residence is the one key area. The other area that's important is care, and that requires a little bit more personalization, if you like, because of course people's care needs are going to be different, you know, and therefore the capacity assessment has to be different. So in Martha's situation, her care needs are support with managing her diabetes diet and her continence, and also support with remembering things. So as well as that, she has to know who would provide the support and what would happen if that support wasn't there or wasn't provided. Now, in this case, this example that I've given, Martha can't remember that she is having care and support, and is sort of refusing to accept the assurance from the assessor that actually she has had it. She just can't remember it. But because she can't remember that direct experience of having care, she doesn't trust the assessor, and therefore the outcome of this assessment is that she can't understand the information relevant to the assessment. She's okay on the residence, not so good on the care. And the other thing to remember as well is you only have to fail one of the 4 elements of the functional test to be deemed as lacking capacity. If you ask 10 different people or 100 different people how to do a capacity assessment, you'll get 100 different answers. There is no right or wrong. The way I prefer to do it is to put more of the kind of conversation, if you like, in the understand section, along with the case law, if it's there. And then in the retain section and the use or way, I tend to put a little bit more of my analysis. So when I've been looking at whether she can retain the information, I've said, well, yeah, she kept track of the conversation as we went along, but she couldn't hold on to what I was telling her about her care needs because she didn't have that direct experience of it. A really useful question for retain, I put at the end here, which is to kind of say to people, you know, thanks for your time. Can you just give us a quick rundown of what we've talked about today and what your decision is? And you know, if people just can't do that, then I think that gives you some strong evidence to say that the person lacks capacity. The final difficult area is that of whether the person can use or weigh the relevant information. The best way to start this off is to ask people to talk, to share with you some of the advantages and disadvantages of staying in the care home, and then some of the advantages and disadvantages of going back home, or being homeless for that instance, you know, if that's the only option available to them. The difficulty that you will have with this is sometimes people don't want to acknowledge any disadvantages to their chosen option. So they will downplay the risks. And it's really difficult sometimes telling whether somebody is deliberately downplaying the risks or whether they deliberately can't acknowledge them because they're struggling with them. So in those situations, a good question to ask is to say, you know, look, I appreciate you don't see there's any problems with going home, but what do I think are the risks? And how do I think you might need to deal with this situation? And what that does is it gives you, you know, if they can answer that, it gives you some evidence that they can hold your point of view in their mind and disregard it, and probably puts them in the realms of having capacity in this area. So the communicate section is generally fairly straightforward. You would only say no to that if the person doesn't have any verbal or written communication, but obviously in Martha's case, she is. And then this section here, the decision, is where you need to kind of say, well, I think the person can or cannot make the decision. If you're saying they cannot make the decision, you need to say that that is primarily because of their mental impairment, because there can be other reasons why people struggle to make decisions. and we'll come on to look at those in a minute. Okay, all right, so bear with me for a second and I will go back to the presentation.
Damien, there's lots of questions coming through on the chat, so I don't know whether you want to answer them at the very end.
Yeah, I think I might do that.
Okay.
I'll try and pick those up, try and pick them up at the end.
All
I'm
right.
aware that I'm running short of time, aren't I? So
We're okay for time at the moment. It's okay.
are we? Okay, all right. So just to reiterate some of the main points from looking at that assessment. One of the things that's really important to say is there is case law that says, look, if the person doesn't have any communication or significant confusion, you don't have to go through all those individual points that are on there. You know, if they're failing on the first 2 or 3, then it's fine. You can kind of say you can stop at that stage. It might also be okay in those straightforward cases to just fill in that first box and say, look, the person cannot understand the relevant information. So it kind of follows that they couldn't retain it and couldn't use and weigh it. If the person is more able, though, you really do need to be doing all 4 of those boxes. The other thing to kind of say is just be really clear on what those options are. Is it that they've got a care home or a return home? Or is it actually that there is no other option? So the only option would be homelessness. So be really clear on that up front. And then finally, I think, you know, there's no right or wrong in capacity assessment. That you make a decision based on the balance of probabilities. So you might say, well, actually, I don't know, but 51% I think they lack, 49% I think they have. So pin your colors to the mast is what I'm saying. And if you give it a good shot and you don't drop any howlers, like saying, well, they want to go home, that's clearly daft, and therefore they lack capacity, you know, you'll be okay. Okay, I'm going to look very, very quickly around the issue of sex and intimate contact, which is, as I said, I think it's an area that is more prevalent than perhaps is acknowledged. So this is another area where we have very clear guidance on what a person needs to understand in order to be able to consent to sex. And I think the first thing to say is that it is act specific and not person specific. So what that means is you either have capacity to have sex or you don't. We don't judge it on the fact that you have capacity to have sex with person A, but not person B. You have capacity in this area or you don't. The threshold for what you would need to understand is really low. So all you need to understand is the mechanics and the nature of the sexual act, fairly self-explanatory. The risk that you might catch or transmit sexually transmitted infections, but you don't need to know what they are specifically. You just need to know that they might lead to ill health and that you could reduce that the chance of getting those with precautions like wearing a condom. The sex between a man and a woman can give rise to pregnancy, a basic understanding of contraception. And here's an element that has changed quite recently. So you need to understand that you have a choice and that you can refuse. And something which the Supreme Court has just looked at and given a judgment on is that you need to understand that your partner must also have capacity and needs to consent before and throughout. So previously, F was not part of the test. Now, looking at that, you might say, well, actually, that's not a huge amount that a person needs to understand. And when you think about the cohort of people in care homes, you could say, well, actually, C doesn't apply because, you know, people in their 80s getting pregnant, not a risk. And contraception to avoid that is not part of the test either. So looking at that, that's not a great deal that somebody needs to understand in order to have capacity around sex. So that's the information that you would put in the form that I got up on screen earlier. So then looking at the diagnostic test, so this is the mental impairment. Okay, and I said earlier that we were going to look at this the other way around. We used to look at it diagnostic first. You know, do they have an impairment? Then can they use, weigh, retain, etc., etc. We now look at it the other way around. So what you need to decide is, well, is the person's inability to make the decision as a result of their mental impairment? Now that might, again, sound straightforward, but there are other factors that can affect people's decision making, such as they might be under undue influence or coercion. They might be in denial or, you know, refuse to admit there are problems or risk. They might have a lack of experience. So the good example here is the lady whose husband has always managed her finances. Her husband has always managed her finances, but actually her husband dies and then she's got to manage it. That's not a lack of capacity, that's a lack of experience that is causing her problem with decision making. And the other thing we often come across is people can't make a choice because all the options, as far as they can see it, are bad. So, you know, if they don't want care, but they've got to have a care in a care home or care at home, they may not be able to choose between those two options, neither of which they want. So if you believe that any of those factors is a primary reason for the person failing that functional element, then you have to say that they have capacity. So to finish, and final thoughts, don't forget that you've got the second principle of the MCA, which is that you have to support people to make decision. If you do think the person lacks capacity, then when you're looking at their best interests, and if it's a borderline case where, you know, you're not sure, but you've said that they've lacked, then you need to give their views more weight when you're looking at best interests. So for instance, somebody who wants to go home, who's borderline capacity, you know, we might be kind of saying, well, let's, you know, we need to follow their wishes and we need to try and get them back home again. Be wary of the protection imperative. So this relates to what I was talking about earlier in terms of setting the bar too high when deciding your own relevant information. If you're deeming somebody to lack around the residence and care capacity assessment, then it's pretty likely in a care home that you're going to have to follow that up with a DoLS referral, unless you're happy for that individual to go out all day and you wouldn't call the police if they didn't return. And in regard to the sex capacity assessment, generally this is something you'd be doing with the support of your local authority, but it may be something that you need to do yourself in the first instance until you've had that response back from, say, safeguarding teams or the social worker. So quite a lot to take on board there. I hope I haven't melted everyone's brains by trying to cram too much in. I can see that there are some questions.
Yeah.
So I will, sorry, Karen, go on.
I was going to say, we put out the option to people to ask questions beforehand, and we had a couple come through. But as you see, there are quite a few on the chat as well. So which way round do you want to? The one question we received from Wendy, who's got a dom care, she says she's asked for a copy of the mental capacity assessment and best interest decision made by the social worker when the assessment and best interest decision relates to the person care needs we are commissioned for. Her question is, she's never allowed to have the plan, so she wondered if that was normal. Am I wrong to think that documents should be shared with us to enable us to include the best interest?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question, and it's a really tricky thing to give a kind of general answer to, because it depends on the decision that's being made. So for instance, if it was a capacity assessment around kind of sex, for instance, then I think that should be kept fairly secure and shared with as few people as possible. There's also kind of issues of GDPR, and it's really difficult for me to comment on. When it comes to DoLS assessments, there are statutory duties to share the assessments with people that are consulted. So I could say to you, when it comes to DoLS, well, yes, I could tell you exactly who they need to be shared with. when it comes to general assessments of capacity under the Mental Capacity Act, there isn't any specific guidance. What I would say is if you are providing any kind of restrictions, so if the care that you provide involves providing restrictions, so I don't know, let's say for instance you're giving covert meds to someone in their own home, then you need to have a copy of that paperwork, and I would push that with a social worker. If you're not directly involved in carrying out the restrictions, then it's arguable about whether you should have a copy or not. Personally, North Somerset, I don't see any issue with sharing them if people ask and request, but I can't speak for other local authorities. So a really woolly answer, I'm afraid, but
sorry. There's one question here: how would the amendments to the MCA will affect day services? I don't know if you've got a. Pete Collins has actually said he'd appreciate a brief update on the LPS. Not everyone will be up to date, so you think others might need some sort of information. Have you?
Okay.
Can you any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so day services and LPS, the idea with LPS is going to be that they'll be portable, the assessment. So rather than just authorizing care in a particular residence, as happens now, that, if a person is, let's say, in a care home, and then they go to day services, and then they go back to mum and dad's house, that the LPS will follow them around, if you like, and authorize the care arrangements in all those circumstances. So from that point of view, that's good and welcome. Regarding LPS, and its implementation, it was due to come in April of this year. We've just heard, I don't know, a week or two ago that that's not going to happen. The government is not setting a date until after the consultation. So really one of the big problems with its implementation is there was due to be a revised Mental Capacity Act code of practice combined with a new LPS code of practice, and that's not written. And we need to see the detail of that code of practice before we can start looking at how we implement LPS. So that consultation, we understand, I think, will probably be kicked off around Easter time, and will probably take about 3 to 6 months. And after that is done, then the government will announce when LPS is starting. So I think it'll be kicked back a year. I think we're looking at April 2023, but who knows?
All right. Okay. Thank you. Kelly is asking a question about the number of question is to review capacity assessments and how often they should be carried out.
Yeah, I mean, again, really good question. There's nothing that in terms of a review of a capacity assessment, there's two issues here that Kelly's raised. One is, how often should you review a capacity assessment? And the second question is, well, how decision specific do you make capacity assessments? I'm a big believer in doing good quality capacity assessments where they're needed, not doing hundreds of capacity assessments of variable quality that don't really mean anything. I'd much rather have quality over quantity. Unfortunately, that's not necessarily the same response or the same approach that's taken across the board. So different MCA DoLS managers, different CQC inspectors will have a different approach on those things. Locally in North Somerset, I suppose I take the view that the Court of Protection routinely accept assessments for somebody's capacity around property and affairs, which is a huge area. So if the Court of Protection are happy to take assessments around that big area, then why are we not allowed to? What my take is that if you are doing something that the person is objecting to or is particularly restrictive, then you need to do a separate capacity assessment. So covert medication, hand holding if you're providing personal care to somebody, managing somebody's money sort of unofficially whilst a deputyship application is being made. In those cases, do your capacity assessments and do them well. But to a certain extent, you are also going to have to be guided by your local MCA lead and your CQC inspector. But that's what I would be telling you if you came to me. That sounds like another wriggly response, doesn't it? But I just, yeah, it's something I feel quite strongly about, and I don't like seeing. One of the things I just feel is pointless is seeing, you know, as you said, I mean, that's 15 capacity assessments every year times 15. My maths isn't very good. It's a lot of capacity assessments. They're going to be, you know, pretty arbitrary if you've got to do that many and look after patients as well. So residents as well. Yeah.
Thank you. Can you see Peter's next one? He's talking about listening today of providers of care home services, but many provide services such as supported living. Is an excellent example, but do you also have one concerning risk taking in independent living? Yeah,
so I suppose actually the whole question of where somebody lives for their care and support is as relevant in care homes as it is you know, for supported living. It's just that we can't apply DoLS in supported living. So, you know, the one area which I think is really difficult at the moment is probably around video monitoring in people's homes. So as that technology gets a lot cheaper and a lot easier, you know, we often come across families that have set up, you know, Nest cameras to keep an eye on mum or dad in their own home. You know, in lots of ways, they're great. They enable mum and dad to stay in their home for a lot longer. The problem that you've got is the law is still playing catch up a bit. And, you know, if you're videoing somebody in their own home, it's a possible breach of their right to family and private life, which needs a court authorization. There are ways that we can kind of minimize that. So generally, you know, if somebody's got video monitoring, you know, in their lounge, we would ask for a capacity assessment and a best interest decision on that, and a specific capacity assessment. But, you know, if it's in somebody's bedroom, for instance, or in someone's bathroom, at that point, we'd be saying, right, we need a referral into kind of social services now to pull this apart a little bit more. The difficulty with these cases is actually, practically speaking, they're great strategies, really useful. But as I said, the law still could see these as breaches of somebody's right to privacy and family life. And a good way of always looking at it is, you know, how would I feel if I had a camera set up in my bedroom, even if it was the best of intentions? Well, most of us would probably feel a little bit sort of uncomfortable about that. So apply that to the people we're caring for. And, you know, that means we should probably pick it apart a little bit more. I hope that's helpful, Pete.
Yeah. And Kirsty has just said, could you include more than one decision on a capacity assessment, or is it just one decision per assessment?
Well, and here's where we get a bit sort of wriggly, is that it depends on how wide you draw the assessment, really. So, you know, can somebody make the decision where they live for their care and support? Well, that's one decision, although it includes lots of other little elements, doesn't it? So you can include, it should only be one decision per assessment, but you can draw it reasonably wide in some cases. So for instance, property and affairs is a prime example. Can someone make a decision about their property and affairs? Well, you know, I've been at home today and I've made several decisions about my property and affairs because I did some online banking before I got on work this morning. But, you know, I would include them in one umbrella. Some you do need to do separately though. So covert medication, video cameras, you need to draw those decisions quite small, but some decisions can be drawn a bit wider. So the prime example of that is where somebody lives for their care and support.
Thank you. Yeah, that's well. A couple of people have asked if we can put the links up and share a copy. I think you said you can send me your slides if you would, and then we can add them onto Care and Support West website.
Yeah, so what I'll do is I'll add the slides. I've got the mock-up assessment, which I'll send as well.
Perfect.
I've got a sort of information sheet from 39 Essex Chambers, and also from an easy read Supreme Court bit of guidance. So I'll send them all through.
That'd be really helpful. Thank you, Damien. That was brilliant. Well, I'm sure everybody's going to take away something that they didn't know about today. So thank you very, very much. Thank you.
No problem.
Right, everybody, time-wise, I'm not sure if you, I was going to do a little bit about Workforce Development Fund, but we're running a little bit, we're up to 1:15, but what I wanted to do was, I'm not going to do now what I was going to do, because I thought it was important for you to listen to Damien. But I do want to say to you, if you don't know anything about Workforce Development Fund, please can you contact me, or please can you just drop me a quick email and I'll come back to you. And I just don't want you to miss out on funding that you can have for helping you to with your staff's training, your training budget. The other thing I wanted to say was about Data Security Protection Toolkit. Really important. I've talked to many of you. Many of you have taken advantage of the support that through the Better Security, Better Care programme. And thank you for that. But there are still many of you that still need to complete your toolkit. And on that note, I'm going to hand you over to David, who's, I think, going to close our meeting for us.
Yeah, thanks very much, Karen. Lots and lots of good information. Thank you to Kate. Really get ideas around recruitment and retention. If you've got questions, please go directly to Kate, or you can come through inquiries at Caring Support West, and we'll pass that on. Lots of detailed information from Damien. A really good session, Damien. Thank you so much. I think that we all know about the Mental Capacity Act. We all know the initials, and we all know some of the stuff around it. But that level of detail that you were sharing with us about how to focus on and concentrate on particular areas, really helpful. And then my final thanks is to you, Karen. Your first workshop for 2022, following on, as you say, from Angela previously. Thank you so much for organising that. And just lastly from me, just a reminder, it was in the chat, Kath put it in the chat, there's a symposium on March the 2nd in relation to integrated care and integrated care boards. Really useful to welcome you to that. That information has come out on comms, so book your place with that. You talked about nominations being open, so that's good. I don't need to say anything about that. Cost pressures report, that is now on our website. We've done a major cost pressures report. Do have a look at that. Come back to me if you've got questions around that. It's a really helpful report. It's gone to all the directors of adult social care, all the MPs in your areas, and all the elected members who are adult social care leads in your local authorities. So that's all I wanted to say. Apart from the conference on June 7th is in relation to, well, the working headline at the moment is fixing social care. So I'm not sure that we'll fix it all on June 7th, but that's the working headline. So thank you for all of you pitching up today, and enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll get all this information to you when we can. Thank you very much indeed. Bye now.